Welcome to the Team SNG deck profile. Today we are going to be talking about the much alluded to pure Fallen of Albaz deck that was played at the Remote Duel Extravaganza on the Saturday, just for, for a bit of fun. While I've got your attention, I'd like to ask you guys, do leave us a like, leave us a comment, leave us a subscribe, because we will be updating this deck with the new cards when they come out, and next week we're going to be pitting the Unchained Albaz deck against something else from our back catalog. Now, this deck is a pure going second deck. It utilizes Kaijus, it utilizes Nibiru, and it utilizes other methods of taking stuff off of your opponent's field to build a massive board. The whole point is to hopefully OTK. Now, when I played with it on the Saturday of the Remote Duel Extravaganza, it did steal a few games. But, right, getting into it. First card, obviously, the most important, is 3 copies of the Fallen of Albaz. Fallen of Albaz is an amazing card. It is basically super poly. What you do is when it's normal or special summoned, you get to pitch a card to fuse a card on your opponent's side of the field and Fallen of Albaz into one of the Fallen of Albaz boss monsters or into a fusion monster. So it doesn't actually have to be a Fallen of Albaz boss. It can be any fusion monster that you have the materials for. So if you're fusing off another Dark, you can go into Starving Venom fusion. If your opponent has Zombie World on the field, you can go into your Dragon Necro Nether Soul Dragon. It is basically super poly on legs, which is really nice. The only problem is that it can be negated, so you do need to be aware of that when you build your board. Now that we have our Fallen of Albaz established, we're going to talk about what else we have running in the deck to try and give him the power. And one of the things we do is we run a very large Kaiju engine for him to fuse off. The idea is that you tribute off something on your opponent's side of the field for one of your Kaijus, and then you fuse Fallen of Albaz and your Kaiju off into your big boss monsters that you run. So, the first Kaiju we run is one Radian. He is a 2800 attacker, which is the reason we have him. We then run 2 copies of Dogoran, 2 copies of Gadarla, 1 copy of the Thunder King, and finally, we do run the 1 Jizukiru. Now, the whole reason for running this is these guys are level 8, meaning that we can use them for trade-in. He is a Dark, meaning we can use him for Allure of Darkness, and they all act as suitable sources to fuse into Titaniklad, which is one of the Fallen of Albaz boss monsters. But they also all act as other than the Radian, do act as suitable fusion material for Bridegrand if we feel we need to go into him. On top of the Kaiju engine, we run a quite robust Danger engine, what with our typical setup of Jackalope, Sneck, and Nessie. We were alongside them run Danger Mothman, just hoping to dig a little deeper into the deck, Danger Thunderbird, letting us take stuff off our opponent's board or put a big body on our own, depending on what happens, obviously. And Danger Bigfoot, again, taking something off our opponent's board and building our own board, potentially. So, these cards, again, all valuable because they can be used for Allure of Darkness, and these 4 here can all be used for our trade-in as well. So we have lots of ways of getting draw power, which is really important to this deck because if you don't see Fallen of Albaz, this deck can sometimes be a little dead in the water. Now, we do run some hand traps because obviously we're going second. We need to be able to play through whatever our opponent's putting on the board. Now, I will be honest with you, we didn't have all of these cards when we played on the Saturday because I was waiting for a couple copies of Nibiru in the mail. So, what we are currently running is 3 copies of Ash Blossom and 3 copies of Nibiru. Now, at the actual tournament, I only have 1 Nibiru. Nibiru is really, really nice in this deck because not only do you give your opponent something that you can fuse off with Fallen of Albaz, but you also give yourself something that you can use to help run over your opponent on your own turn. So Nibiru is so nice in this deck. That does it for the monsters. Now, we did talk about how Fallen of Albaz is like Super Poly, but he is negatable. So we do run Super Poly here as a safety net. We can either Super Poly off our Fallen of Albaz, or we do run enough Super Poly targets that we could Super Poly off stuff from our opponent's field just to give ourselves something. It doesn't have to be Albaz related. To help our Kaiju engine work, we run 3 copies of Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. Now, this works in multiple fashions, one of which is it can bait out negates. The second of which is it helps us set up the OTK, because we can give our opponent Jizukiru and give ourselves the Thunder King, and then if we get Fallen of Albaz, we fuse Jizukiru and Fallen of Albaz off into Titaniklad. But this time, Titaniklad's got 3,900 attack right there, and Jizukiru's got 33. So if you manage to get this off with the Fallen of Albaz in hand, and you get your Fallen of Albaz effect to go through, you're sitting with 7,200 damage on board. You just need to find a way to get 800 more on the board. Now the deck does sometimes suffer from back row, so we do run some back row removal in our Twin Twisters. This also benefits our Danger engine, because it does let us get into our Danger package, which is also very nice. And as stated, we run lots of draw power. If we don't see Fallen of Albaz, this deck does tend to fall a little flat on its face. So we're running 3 copies of Allure of Darkness, as alluded to already, and we're running 3 copies of Trade-In, as alluded to already. On top of these 6 cards, we are also running 2 copies of Pot of Desires. At one point, we were running 3, but we've taken 1 out just to give ourselves that extra Nibiru, because Nibiru is just that good in this deck. Does it for our spells. As for our traps, there aren't any. So let's just get on to the extra deck. Now, obviously, we are running a ton of Super Poly targets, and we are running a lot of fusion monsters because Fallen of Albaz and Super Poly both act as, well, Super Poly. So, first we are running is 3 copies of Titaniklad. Titaniklad requires Fallen of Albaz and a monster with 2,500 or more attack. When it is fusion summoned, he gains 100 attack for every level of the materials used to fusion summon him. So, as stated before, if you're using your Fallen of Albaz and your Jizukiru, you are gaining 1,000 attack points from Jizukiru and 400 from Fallen of Albaz. That's for a whopping 1,400, putting your Titaniklad at 3,900. And that's incredible. That's almost half of the game on board right there from just fusing away Jizukiru, which you've given to your opponent. Now, he has another effect. He's unaffected by the activated effects of extra deck monsters the turn that he is special summoned. So if you do manage to summon him on your opponent's turn, then he will be unaffected till the end of that turn. Finally, he does have a floating effect. If he is removed from the field, he can special summon or add to the hand a copy of Fallen of Albaz. Now, he can also add or special summon a Dogmatica card, but we're not running any of them, so that does not matter to us. On top of him, for Fallen of Albaz, we are running Bridegrand the Glory Dragon. Now, Bridegrand the Glory Dragon, a little more difficult for us, but he basically requires a level 8 or higher monster and Fallen of Albaz. Now, I say that that's difficult for us. We're only running 1 Kaiju that isn't level 8 or higher, and we are also running Nibiru, and his token is level 11. So, his token works as well for Bridegrand the Glory Dragon. Now, hopefully, if you've got a Nibiru token on the opponent's board, you could go into your Titaniklad or your Bridegrand. So you're often going to find yourself in a situation where you have to decide which to go into. And often Titaniklad is the better option, but in certain situations, like if you're playing a deck that is battle-orientated, you might want to go into Bridegrand because he can't be destroyed by battle. Also, your opponent can't target other monsters that you control with their own monster effect. And again, much like Titaniklad, during the end phase of the turn where he leaves the field, you get to special summon a Fallen of Albaz, or in this case, a Tri-Brigade. But again, we're not running any of them, so they don't. On to some of the more generic Super Poly targets that we run. As alluded to, we run Starving Venom Fusion. If your opponent's playing a Dark, you can use Fallen of Albaz and your opponent's Dark monster to go into this. We run Greedy Venom Fusion. This is basically here for the Predaplant Verte Anaconda play, where you target something on your opponent's field, make it Dark. If it's level 8 or higher, you can fuse it, Verte Anaconda and the now Dark level 8 monster off your opponent's field into your Greedy Venom Fusion Dragon, which can be a bit of a deterrent for your opponent because if they take it off the board, it's going to blow up the board. On top of that, we run Predaplant Trifo-Vertum. And finally, for that pesky zombie matchup, or those Eldritch Zombie Worlds or whatever, if your opponent has turned everything on the field into zombies, including your Fallen of Albaz, you can actually use Fallen of Albaz to go into your Dragon Necro Nether Soul Dragon. On top of that, if your opponent hasn't turned everything to zombies, you could use Super Poly to fuse off their zombies to go into this as well, which is just a nice little play that you do have access to. Now, we do run some Link monsters. We don't go into them very often. We are more focused on going into our fusion engine, but we run some generic sort of staple Link monsters to hopefully give ourselves the ability to play if we can't see Fallen of Albaz. First of these is our Nightmare Phoenix, followed by our Nightmare Unicorn, followed by our Nightmare Cerberus. Now, this is a typical Nightmare package. On top of that, we have mentioned that we do run our Predaplant Verte Anaconda. This helps us see Super Poly whenever we need it, and that's really useful in situations where we maybe aren't going to get to our Fallen of Albaz. On top of these, we do run our IP Masquerena, and hopefully for those occasional times where we're absolutely desperate and we do manage to get material on board for it, we do run our Mech Knight Crusadia Avermax. It is just a safety net. I will say I did not go into it once during my experimentation with this deck at the Remote Duel Extravaganza. However, he is definitely an option that the deck could potentially access if it manages to grind out a few extra turns. That does it for our extra deck. So, my final thoughts on this deck. It's an interesting deck. It definitely has potential with some of the future support coming out for Fallen of Albaz. Its ability to go into an assortment of different fusion monsters to help you steal a game is really interesting as well. I am greatly looking forward to the upwards potential this deck does have. Currently, it is basically an OTK deck. The goal is to wipe out your opponent's board using an assortment of different kaijus that can basically take stuff off your opponent's board and act as fusion fodder for your Fallen of Albaz. On top of that, the big blowout play of Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, when partnered up with Fallen of Albaz, is really powerful because you've basically giving yourself a body on board, you're taking everything off of your opponent's board, you're also then fusing off the one thing you have to give them with your Interrupted Kaiju Slumber for a massive body on your side of the field. And all you need at that point is a way to discard your Danger Jackalope, because then you can put another Danger on board, and we do run a full Danger package. Once you put another Danger on board, coupled with any of your Kaijus and a Titaniklad that's fused off any of your other Kaijus, you basically have the OTK, and that's really useful. Now, to give the deck some extra consistency and the ability to play on your opponent's turn, we do run Nibiru just to stop things, and it can act as a massive power boost for your Titaniklad the Ash Dragon, and a big body on your board, again, putting you in a situation where if you get to Nibiru your opponent, and you're Fallen of Albaz, and any way to discard your Danger Jackalope, which could be your Fallen of Albaz, you have an OTK right there. But, again, to add some consistency, we run Super Poly, as Fallen of Albaz can be negated, and so sometimes it's better to use Super Poly than his own effect. That being said, I'd like to thank you guys for watching. If you're interested in seeing what this deck can do and actually seeing the OTK in action, make sure you subscribe, because later this week we will be putting out some test hands where I show you this deck in action. And I'm going to tell you, it may not be the prettiest, but it will definitely show you the potential the deck has. On top of that, I'd like to thank you for watching. Leave us a like, leave us a comment, leave us a subscribe, and I will see you guys at the next video.